बोलो बांके बिहारी लाल की
Jai.
Radhe Radhe, everyone. This will be the last lecture in this series on questions about Hinduism. We've been clearing doubts and confusions about Hindu philosophy. Yesterday I discussed the paths to God, and I explained that although there are many paths described in our scriptures, they're all supposed to lead to the supreme path, which is bhakti. All other paths are some type of preliminary practice to get people engaged in at least moving in a sattvic direction, and eventually the plan is for them to graduate to the path of bhakti. Bhakti is the only path to God. However, bhakti has been taught by many, many saints over the ages. And that can seem confusing to people as well, because they see this saint taught about bhakti in this way, this saint taught about bhakti in another way, this saint worshipped this form of God, this saint worshipped another form of God. So sometimes people get confused and they ask me, why did different saints worship different forms of God? Why did they teach different forms of devotion? And even the way they explain the philosophy, the devotional philosophy, that also differs from saint to saint. We like things to be aligned, right? We don't want confusion. Our mind doesn't want confusion or apparent contradictions. So let's very briefly resolve this apparent contradiction. We already have the required knowledge based on what I've discussed with you in the previous days. Take the first thing. Okay, we accept bhakti is the path to God. Why have different saints worship different forms of God? Why didn't they all worship the same form of God and make it easy for us? And of course, the answer is that one God, when he's representing himself in many forms and revealing different types of bliss through those different forms, and people can establish different relationships with different forms of God, it makes sense that according to one's sanskars, one may be more attracted to one form of God, someone else may be more attracted to another form of God, and saints taught devotion to that form of God that they had attained. They represent that form of God on earth. They represent the blissfulness of that form of God on earth. So of course they're going to teach devotion to that form of God. Tulsidas ji saying, do devotion to Bhagwan Ram, and Mirabai saying, love Shri Krishna, that's not a contradiction. Why is that a contradiction? It's two forms of the same God who were worshipped by different saints over the ages. I mentioned relationships just now. There are 5 main relationships that someone can have with God. They're called Shant Bhav, Dasya Bhav, Sakhya Bhav, Vatsalya Bhav, and Madhurya Bhav. Just this in itself will reveal to us one of the reasons why saints worship different forms. Remember, I told you all the forms of God are categorized into 3 main columns, you could say. Formless God, Almighty God, and the loving form of God. Brahm, Paramatma, Bhagwan. You can't have any relationship with Brahm because you can't see him, you can't touch him, you can't talk to him. You have to have a relationship with someone who inhabits a personal form. So if someone doesn't want a relationship with God, doesn't want to see God, they may worship that formless aspect of God and merge into that Brahmanand. If someone likes to think of God as the king or queen, and I'm a subject in their kingdom, that's called Shant Bhav, and that Bhav applies to the almighty forms of God. This is the way one would relate themselves to, for instance, Mahavishnu, Durgaji, Shivji. You would have that Shant Bhav, because these are almighty forms. Just like if your best friend is a Supreme Court judge, when your friend is in the courtroom, you can't treat them like a friend. You have to treat them with that distant formality and respect. So that's like God in his almighty form. You have to treat him with that respect. That's called Shant Bhav. The other four bhavs, which actually start removing that formality, they only begin with Bhagwan Ram and Shri Krishna. Dasya Bhav, Sakhya Bhav, and Vatsalya Bhav. Loving God as your master and you're his personal servant, Dasya Bhav. Loving God as your best friend or your brother or sister, Sakhya Bhav. Loving God as your own child, your son or daughter, Vatsalya Bhav. These begin with Bhagwan Ram in a slightly formal way. Ram's friends can sit on the same level as him, but I don't think any of them would play a practical joke on him, for instance, or jump out and surprise him and try to scare him, or snatch food out of his mouth and eat it. None of Sri Ram's friends would do that. They're his friends, but there's still quite a bit of formality there. So you can be Sri Ram's servant, you can be his friend, you could be his mother or father. With Shri Krishna, the same three relationships are possible, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, with more freedom. Shri Krishna's friends could do anything with him. They could go swimming with him, splash around with him, they could play ball with him, they could even ride on his back, like say, giddy up horsey, and jump on his back. Shri Krishna would steal the food out of his friend's mouth, thinking, hey, that looks good, and he'd grab it and eat it. In other words, no formality. So you see, different saints are going to worship different forms of God depending which relationship they want to experience. There's one more relationship which is only possible with Shri Krishna. That's Madhuri Bhav or Priyatam Bhav, where you love God as your beloved. So these Madhurya, Vatsalya, Sakhya, and Dasya Bhav, they actually, in that love, both the devotee and God forget about that distance that people normally think, oh, God and me. That distance is eliminated. Even in Dasya Bhav, which normally has a lot of formality, obviously the servant still has to observe a lot of rules around his master, yet sometimes in the love of his devotees, even Ram would forget about those rules. Prabhu tarutar kapidar par. A servant should never sit higher than his master. And yet, Hanumanji and the other Banar, they're sitting up in a tree, the same tree that Ram is sitting under, and Ram is sitting on the ground. And they're sitting above his head. Can you imagine? Such a big aparad. And Shri Ram is Maryada Purushottam Brahm. Everyone is supposed to observe the strict formalities of dharma around him. Yet, neither is Ram scolding his servants, Hanumanji and the others, nor do Hanumanji or the others have any awareness that they've crossed that line. Why? Because they're absorbed in the love of Dasya Bhav. Even that love is so great. It makes God forget he's God and makes his servants forget that they are souls, and brings them that close together that the formalities get forgotten sometimes. That's Dasya Bhav. Then in Sakhya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, the formalities end up disappearing altogether. Mother Yashoda is scolding little Krishna. Can you imagine scolding God? Making him cry? Let me see, open your mouth. Did you eat the soil? Kanha is crying. His kajal that his mom puts under his eyes is running down his cheeks. Who could imagine God being in such a state? But that's what happens with the love of his devotees. One time, a gopi was busy doing some work. She was actually collecting the gobar. The cow dung in India is used for many things, including putting on the floor. It makes the best flooring. Spongy. It's antiseptic also, so it eliminates germs. And it's cooling in the summer and insulates in the winter. Also, you can make it into cakes and dry it and burn it for fuel in the fire. So there are many uses of the gobar. This gopi was gathering gobar into her basket and bringing it back to her house and setting it out to dry to use later. Kanha went walking by, young Krishna. So when she saw him, she said, "Hey, Kanhaiya, idhar aa. Come here." Can you imagine saying to God, "Hey, come here. Hey, Kanha, idhar aa." Kanha, little Krishna comes over. "Yes, Gopi?" "Kanha, I need some help. I'm picking up this gobar and I need you to help me lift the basket on my head. When it's full of gobar, it gets very heavy. So I need you to help me lift it up, and then I'll go and dump it and you help me lift the next one." So Kanha says, "Gopi, do I look like your father's servant? I'm not going to do that work for you." She says, "Okay, listen. For every basket you help me lift on my head, I'll give you one gulla of makhan, like a round ball. You pick it up and I'll feed you." Kanha says, "That sounds really good, Gopi, but there's one problem. I'm illiterate and you're illiterate. Neither of us knows how to count. Who's going to keep track of how many times I help you lift the basket?" So the gopi says, "No problem. Look, every time you lift a basket, I'll take a little bit of gobar and make a mark on your face. That way, for every mark, I'll give you one gulla of makhan." Kanha says, "Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Let's get started." So as they lift each basket, the gopi puts a little mark. She starts on the forehead, but after 10-15 minutes, the forehead is full. So she starts on the cheeks and the nose, and pretty soon his whole face is covered in gobar. She doesn't say anything at the time, but once they're done, and Kanhaiya says, "Where's my makhan?" The gopi says, "Makhan is in the house. Come to my house and I'll feed you." Okay, they go to the house. There in the house, the gopi, looking at Kanha's face covered in gobar, starts giggling. And she calls some friends, "Oh, Gopi," and they're looking and giggling. Kanha says, what are you all laughing about?" She brings a pot of water and puts it in front of him and says, "Just look at your face in the water." And he looks and he sees his whole face is covered in gobar, and the gopis are laughing at him. So in anger, he says, "Gopi," and he takes the water and he washes all the gobar off of his face. And he says, okay, enough is enough. Now feed me my makhan. And the gopi says, what makhan? You don't have any marks left on your face. I don't owe you anything. I was going to give you as much makhan as you had marks on your face. You just washed it off. So now Kanha grabs some gobar and starts chasing the gopi around the house. Says, I'll show you, gopi. Anyway, in the end, the gopi was only teasing him, and she gave him all the makhan he could eat. Can you imagine a soul and God behaving like that together? Yeah, it's possible through Madhurya Bhav. So you can understand that some saints want to love Krishna with Madhurya Bhav, some want to love him with Vatsalya Bhav, some with Sakhya Bhav, some with Dasya Bhav, and some with Shant Bhav, a much more distant relationship, and some just wanted to merge into formless God. So you have all the kinds of saints, and there could be dozens of each kind of saint on earth at any time. Who knows? There could be one or two. There could be dozens. I can't identify who's a saint, but just by sight. So now imagine there are all these saints and they're all teaching devotion to God. And one is saying, love Krishna as your child. And one is saying, love Ram as your master. And one is saying, pray to Supreme God, Mahavishnu. And one is saying, God is formless. And all the people get confused. Why are so many saints saying so many different things? So luckily, we have Jagat Guru Shri Kripaluji Maharaj, a great saint who came and reconciled all these differences. He provided these models for us that I've been explaining to you this week, so we can understand that there are different categories of the forms of God, different bhav, or different ways to relate to God. And accordingly, you have all these different classifications of saints, according to which form of God they worshipped and what their relationship is with God. So of course, that saint is going to teach that type of devotion and that type of love for God. So there's no contradiction, nothing to get confused about. You also just choose. Make that saint your guru, who is teaching devotion to that form of God with that relationship that you also want to adopt and that you also want to attain. So there's no jagada, there's no contradiction between these different saints. They're all one internally. Even the form of devotion, Maharaji reconciled that, because sometimes people say, okay, look, Vallabhacharya was a devotee of Shri Krishna. He taught to take care, like keep a Laddu Gopal, like what we have here, small little Krishna. Keep a Laddu Gopal Murti in your house and treat him as your own son. So early in the morning, wake him up, give him a bath, dress him, decorate him, feed him breakfast. Then he's going to go out and graze the cows, so send some lunch with him. Later in the day, when he returns from grazing the cows, give him another bath, give him his dinner. Or no, not yet, I got that wrong. Give him a bath, let him have a little nap. Then when he gets up, give him his dinner. Then he might go outside and play, so when he comes in, maybe a bedtime snack, then put him down to sleep. So you keep serving baby Krishna the whole day long. Another saint says, no, you should do jap. Repeat some mantra or some name of Shri Krishna and just keep repeating it a certain number of times. So keep saying his name and remember him. Another saint says, do kirtan. Sit and chant God's name with dholak and harmonium. Another saint says, read Shri Krishna's Leelas. So a person might look at that and say, why do all these saints, they're all devotees of Shri Krishna, they're all teaching devotion to Shri Krishna. Why are they teaching different ways of doing devotion? The goal of what they're teaching is exactly the same. What I just described to you were the external forms of devotion. What's more important is what's going on internally. Why did Vallabhacharya ji say, keep serving Shri Krishna all day? Do pujan to his murti? Why? Because that should help you remember Shri Krishna. That's the internal devotion. You should be doing Roop Dhyan, that this is not just a murti, this is my Lala. My baby Krishna is right here. What's that? That's Roop Dhyan. The saint who taught to do jap and keep repeating God's name or a mantra with God's name in it, why did he teach that? Because that should make you keep thinking of Krishna while you're doing jap of his name. You should be doing Roop Dhyan while you're doing that. The one who taught to do kirtan, same thing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ji said, chant Shri Krishna's name. Why? Because that will help you remember him. You have to chant with feelings and longing and love. So you have to be internally remembering him while you're chanting his name. And the one who said, read his leelas, same thing. By reading his leelas, you're remembering him. You're thinking of him. I could go on and on, but I think you're getting the idea that all the saints taught the same internal devotion. You have to love Shri Krishna. You have to surrender to him, surrender your mind to him. They all taught that devotion had to be done mentally. You had to surrender your mind. You had to love him with your whole heart and feel that he alone is yours. They all said the same thing. But even if someone is doing the same, many people are doing the same thing internally, they might get more benefit from another form of external worship that helps them remember God. Remember, these saints lived at different times in different places, and their teachings were for different people at those different times in those different places. So nowadays what tends to happen is people, because we've formed some sampradayas in the names of these saints, like the sampradaya in the name of Vallabhacharya is called Pushti Marg. There's a sampradaya in the name of Jagadguru Nimbarkacharya. There's a sampradaya in the name of Swami Haridas. There's a sampradaya in the name of Hita Harivansh. There's a Gaudiya sampradaya. There are all these sampradaya, these lineages that originated with saints who are teaching about devotion to Krishna, I'm just saying. I'm being very specific. There are, of course, many other sampradaya for devotion to other forms of God. And nowadays people say, okay, which sampradaya should I belong to? Or the people following one sampradaya want to argue and say the people in this other sampradaya are wrong. Kripaluji Maharaj said, no. All those saints who originated those sampradaya, they were all correct. They all taught to internally love Krishna. It doesn't matter if the external form of devotion they taught differs. Do whatever helps you. Do whatever works for you as long as you're remembering Radha Krishna. So Maharaji, with one swipe, removed all the arguments between the different sampradaya. In fact, he went so far as to say that there's really only two sampradaya. There's Shri Krishna's sampradaya and there's the Mayik sampradaya. Because Kathopanishad says, Tayoh Shreya Adadanasya Sadhu Bhavati Hiyater Nartham Upreyo Vrinite. One will either go towards God, which is called Shreya Marg, the path that leads to ultimate happiness, or one will go towards the world, which is called Preya Marg, which leads to temporary enjoyments and ultimately disappointment and unhappiness. So there are only two options. Because there are three eternal existences, God, souls, and Maya. So in your search for happiness, you will either go towards God or you'll go towards Maya. So all the people in the world teaching any path, they're either teaching you to go towards Maya or towards God. So if they're teaching you devotion to God, they're in Shri Krishna's sampradaya. Take even Shankaracharya, who is known for teaching devotion to formless God. Although secretly, privately, he was also a devotee of Shri Krishna, but publicly he taught the path of Gyan, which leads towards formless God. Sri Maharaji says, why do we call it Shankaracharya's sampradaya? He also had a guru. His guru was Govinda Padacharya. So why don't we call it Govinda Padacharya's sampradaya instead of Shankaracharya's? But he says, don't stop there. Govinda Padacharya had a guru, Gauda Padacharya. Why not call it Gauda Padacharya's sampradaya? But wait, he also had a guru, Shukadev Paramahansa. Why not call it Shukadev's sampradaya? But wait, he also had a guru, Vedavyas. He also had a guru, Naradji. He also had a guru, Brahma. And who is Brahma's guru? Shri Krishna. So it's Shri Krishna's sampradaya. Why are we calling it Shankaracharya's sampradaya? Same thing with Nimbarkacharya. Same thing with Vallabhacharya. Same thing with Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, all the great saints. If you trace back their lineage, it goes all the way to none other than Shri Krishna. So all the different lineages, they're just different teachings by different saints for certain people at a certain time, and then the people, other followers, keep following it through over hundreds of years, and then those followers end up becoming rigid. And instead of following the internal teachings that you're supposed to devote yourself internally to God, they start arguing about the external things. Oh, these people don't wear tulsi malas. That's wrong. Oh, why do you guys wear that kind of tilak? That tilak is not right. So people start arguing about all the external things which actually don't have any bearing. We should focus on the internal things. Shri Maharaji also went to great lengths to reconcile the teachings of all of these saints, especially the great Jagat Gurus. And I don't have time to go into it tonight, but he even showed that although all these saints, if you read their teachings, it may seem very confusing. All these great Jagat Gurus appeared to explain our scriptures very differently. But Shri Maharaji took a lot of time, and in great detail, he reconciled all of the teachings of all the previous Jagat Gurus and showed that this whole Brahm, Jeev, Maya, it's such a complex thing, divine situation to explain and understand, that of course each saint is going to explain it from a certain perspective. Like if all of you stand outside of Yugal Kunj and you're all standing in different places around it, and then you're asked to write down what you see, and you describe Yugal Kunj from your perspective, each of you is going to describe it differently, even though you're seeing the same thing. So Maharaji explained that there's no need to argue about the teachings or the writings of these great historical saints either. They were all explaining about the same divine phenomenon, just in different words. So hopefully all of this helps you understand the underlying unity between all the forms of God, the different ways of doing bhakti, and all the saints, all the great saints that have inhabited this earth, they were also internally one. So we should use this to remove those doubts we may have had or those confusions and just keep devotion simple. love Shri Krishna, do whatever external form of worship helps us increase our love for Shri Krishna or helps us keep our mind in his remembrance. And by practicing that, we can actually move towards the attainment of the ultimate aim of our life. So that's where I'll end this series. Boliye Vrindavan Bihari Lal ki Jai.